On Sunday, June 27, 2021, emergency services in Devon, England received a deeply disturbing call. Someone had discovered a body behind a hedge along a quiet back road. And if it hadn't been for the smell, that unmistakable, pervasive odor, the body might have gone undiscovered for far, far longer. Police arrived quickly. The location? A desolate woodland path near the coastal town of Soucombe, the kind of road most people never have reason to walk. What they found was the body of a woman, and it was headless. But it got worse. The top two cervical vertebrae, C1, known as the atlas, and C2, the axis, the bones that support and rotate the head, were missing entirely. Many of the victim's ribs had been shattered into fragments. Scattered nearby, officers collected torn pieces of leather from what appeared to be a notebook, its pages inscribed with passages of scripture. The woman was dressed in a loose-fitting jacket and slippers. A handbag sat near her feet, and inside it, a length of orange rope. In her jacket pocket, a few church flyers and a plastic wallet. But nothing, not a single item, that could tell police who she was. Working outward from the body, investigators expanded their search radius. 4 days later, roughly 10 meters away, concealed in dense undergrowth, they found the missing head. The scalp was almost completely gone. The skull bore numerous distinct fractures. Through further investigation, the victim was finally identified. Her name was Mee Kuen Chong. She was 67 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, slight in build, born in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, raised in a loving family. She had moved to England at 40. Met and married her husband in London, and eventually became a British citizen. There's something uniquely beautiful about a friendship that defies age. A bond built not on shared circumstances, but on a deep connection of spirit and belief. The celebrated poet Li Bai and the official He Zhejiang, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. These relationships remind us what friendship at its best is capable of. But in 2021, in the United Kingdom, a friendship that should have embodied all of that warmth and trust took a turn so dark, so brutal, that it sent shockwaves across the entire country. This is the story of Mee Kuen Chong. Together, Mee Kuen Chong and her husband built something neither of them had started with, a house of their own, in a quiet, comfortable neighborhood, with enough set aside that the bills got paid and the table was never empty. It wasn't much by some measures, but it was theirs, and for 20 years that house held everything that mattered to her: the rhythm of a shared life, the small rituals of a marriage, the particular comfort of knowing someone would be there when you came home. Then retirement came, and not long after that her husband was gone. She had no children to call, no one to sit with her in the evenings, so she opened the doors. She rented out the spare rooms, not just for the income, but because an empty house after 40 years of marriage is a particular kind of unbearable. She needed voices in the hallway again, footsteps on the stairs, the sound of someone else making tea in the kitchen at odd hours. Mee Kuen Chong was a devout Christian, and she took her faith seriously, not just as a Sunday ritual, but as a way of living. If someone came to her door without a coat, she found them one. If they hadn't eaten, she fed them. She'd let people stay, strangers, people with nowhere else to go, and she wouldn't ask for much in return. Friends remembered her saying it plainly, more than once. When she died, she wanted her house to go to the homeless. Not to family, not to anyone who already had enough, to the people who had nothing. That was just who she was. But behind that generous, open-hearted exterior, Mee Kuen Chong was also carrying an enormous weight. 6 years before her murder, she had been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and acute stress disorder. Later came additional diagnoses: bipolar disorder and paranoid schizophrenia. She spent months in hospitalization and treatment, and throughout all of it, both her mental and physical health remained incredibly fragile. The illness brought severe mood swings, intense anxiety, and behaviors that were, at times, difficult for the people around her to manage. At one point, a tenant simply couldn't handle it anymore and moved out. A fellow churchgoer remembered that Mee Kuen Chong was deeply passionate about climate change. She had strong, clear opinions on the science, and when the topic came up, her energy was almost electric. But if someone pushed back, if they disagreed, that conversation could escalate fast. She was also convinced, genuinely convinced, that she had formed a romantic relationship with Prince Charles through YouTube. She wrote letters regularly to Buckingham Palace. And yet, on her better days, she was an entirely different person. Charming, warm, disarmingly innocent in the way she saw the world. She fought her illness with everything she had, determined to live as normally as possible. And in the end, it wasn't the illness that took her life. At first, forensic examiners had a different theory. Based on the condition of the head, they initially suspected that Mee Kuen Chong may have been attacked by animals, either before or after death. The shattered ribs, they thought, might have been caused by overly aggressive CPR attempts, but that theory didn't hold up for long. After a thorough examination, scientists confirmed that the head had been severed using a sharp object. The skull fractures were consistent with impact against a hard, protruding surface or a blunt weapon. As for the precise cause of death, that remained undetermined, but the conclusion was clear. This was officially classified as a murder. Mee Kuen Chong's body had been found over 170 miles from her home. So what exactly happened to her in the days before she died? Investigators started where they always do, the surveillance cameras near her house. What they found was this. On June 9th, Mee Kuen Chong was captured on CCTV walking slowly down the street alongside one of her tenants. She moved with some difficulty, but she was alert, aware. When they parted ways, she even paused to express her gratitude. Everything looked normal, unremarkable even. 2 days later, on June 11th, she was gone. Her tenant noticed she wasn't home. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. Given her history of mental illness, the tenant didn't hesitate. They reported her missing to the police and began posting flyers around the neighborhood. Officers searched her home. No signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, no foreign fingerprints, but something was clearly off. Several areas of the house had been visibly ransacked, and her bank cards, passport, driver's license, all of her most important documents had vanished. Then something else caught investigators' attention. In the days following Mee Kuen Chong's disappearance, one of her friends had been behaving strangely. This person was simultaneously reaching out to missing persons charities for help, while also telling people that Mee Kuen Chong had simply decided to go back to Malaysia to visit family and planned to stay for a year. A convenient story, except customs had absolutely no record of Mee Kuen Chong entering or leaving the country, and her bank account? No activity. None. When investigators went back through the CCTV footage around her home more carefully, they confirmed it. This same friend, the one spreading that story about Malaysia, had visited Mee Kuen Chong on the very day she disappeared. The pieces were adding up fast. Police moved her to the top of the suspect list. Her name was Jemma Mitchell, 37 years old, originally from Australia. Now let's walk through what the cameras actually captured. At 6:15 in the morning on June 11th, Mitchell left her home. She was wearing a hat and a scarf despite the early summer date. She had a backpack on her back and was dragging a blue suitcase behind her. Her jacket sleeves were rolled up. The streets were empty. It was early, barely anyone out. By 6:40, she had boarded a London Underground train, and somewhere along the ride, she made deliberate changes to her appearance, intentionally altering how she looked. When she resurfaced on camera at 7:57 a.m., her sleeves were down and the hat was gone. She then arrived at Mee Kuen Chong's house and rang the doorbell. At that hour, Mee Kuen Chong's other tenants were out. She was home alone. She answered the door and she let Mitchell in. What happened inside that house during those next several hours? What was said? What was done? Nobody knows. What the cameras do know is this. From the moment Mitchell walked through that door, Mee Kuen Chong was never seen leaving. After nearly 5 hours inside, at 12:58 in the afternoon, Mitchell walked back out, but she wasn't traveling light anymore. In addition to the blue suitcase she'd arrived with, she was now hauling a second one, a red suitcase. Both bags looked extraordinarily heavy. She dragged them through the streets for almost 2 hours, stopping repeatedly, bracing herself, visibly straining under the weight. She looked exhausted. By 1:36 p.m., when she appeared on camera again, the red suitcase was gone. After several attempts, Mitchell finally managed to flag down a taxi willing to take her. About 40 minutes later, at 4:16 p.m., she arrived home, and shortly after that, she showed up at a nearby hospital. Her story: she'd caught her finger in a door and fractured it. For the next 2 weeks, she barely left the house. Then, at 8 in the morning on June 26th, Mitchell was on the move again. She rented a car, went back to her house to retrieve the blue suitcase, loaded it into the trunk, and drove away. She stopped at a petrol station to fill up, briefly pulled into a cafe, and kept going. Her destination wasn't immediately clear, but as the car crossed into Devon County, something happened. The front left tire blew out. She limped the car to the nearest repair shop, and the entire scene was captured on the shop's own surveillance system. Once the car was fixed, she continued on her way, not returning home until 7 the following morning. Here's what made investigators stop cold. The spot where Mitchell's tire blew and the location where Mee Kuen Chong's body was found were on the exact same road. And the timing of her return home lined up precisely with when she would have finished that long round trip. The purpose of that drive suddenly became the central question of the entire investigation. Employees at the repair shop later told police that Mitchell seemed deeply unsettled. Her body was trembling, not just nervous energy, but a persistent, uncontrollable shaking, like she was in some kind of physical distress. When mechanics opened the trunk to retrieve the spare tire, they noticed something else. A smell, hard to describe, damp and earthy, with a stale, suffocating undertone. But when they looked inside, there was no blue suitcase, just a blanket and a pillow. And when the mechanics went to place the replaced tire back into the trunk, Mitchell stopped them. She refused to let them put it back in. Police later pulled the call records from the car rental company. The phone number Mitchell had used to book the vehicle didn't belong to her. It belonged to a neighbor, one who had died weeks earlier. So how did these two women, separated by 40 years, end up in each other's lives in the first place? By all accounts, Jemma Mitchell and Mee Kuen Chong had once been genuinely close. At the peak of their friendship, they were exchanging hundreds of messages a day. To everyone around them, Mitchell seemed devoted, attentive, caring, almost like a daughter looking after an aging mother. And yet, this same woman was now sitting at the center of a murder investigation. So what really went on between them? To understand that, you have to understand where Jemma Mitchell came from, and more importantly, where she thought she was going. Her mother had built a distinguished career in the UK Foreign Office. Her father, an Australian, was largely absent. Mitchell grew up knowing she was on her own in the ways that mattered, that if she wanted a different life, she would have to go out and take it, and for a long time, that's exactly what she did. At 16, she moved to England with her mother. She sat the exams, got the grades, and earned her place at King's College London. Not a safety school, not a backup plan. King's. She studied human sciences, graduated with outstanding marks, walked away with academic awards, then postgraduate studies at the Royal College of Surgeons of England. Then 7 years back in Australia, working as an orthopedic surgeon. On her hospital's official website, she had written openly about her deep interest in neuroanatomy, kinesiology, and human dissection, the kind of candid professional statement that reads very differently in hindsight. Picture what that life looked like from the outside. A surgeon, published, credentialed, the kind of career that takes 15 years of relentless work to build and earns you a particular kind of respect in every room you walk into. And then her grandmother died. Under the terms of the will, the property where her grandmother had lived was left to Mitchell. She saw it as more than an inheritance. She saw it as a door opening. She resigned her position, flew back to England, and arrived ready to begin again. But the General Medical Council's registration process moved slowly, and while she waited, she couldn't practice. No income, no patients, no OR, just a woman with a surgical career on pause, sitting in a house that wasn't quite hers yet, watching the momentum she'd spent years building come to a complete stop. She and her mother decided to tear the house down and build something new, smaller, 3 stories, the garden renovated, a fresh start, literally from the ground up. They hired 2 construction companies and poured everything they had into the project, 230,000 British pounds, their entire life savings. They signed the contracts, handed over the money, and waited. And then one of the companies took the money and walked off the job. Just like that, it was gone. No legal recourse that amounted to anything, no way to recover what they'd lost. Mitchell and her mother were left with no savings, a half-demolished house, and no clear path forward. The woman who had spent her entire adult life building towards something now had almost nothing to show for it, and nowhere obvious to go from here. Walk through the front door of that house, and this is what you would have seen. a kitchen counter buried under rotting food that nobody had cleared away, a bathroom that hadn't been properly cleaned in months, entire rooms so cluttered with accumulated junk that you simply couldn't get through them. And outside, a garden that looked less like a garden and more like a dumping ground. Old freezers rusting in the overgrowth, rotting mattresses propped against the fence. Piles of construction debris left exactly where the workers had abandoned them when they walked off the job. The roof had been stripped as part of the renovation. It was never replaced. Every time it rained, the water came straight in. This was where Jemma Mitchell lived, a woman who had spent 7 years as a surgeon, who had once scrubbed in, picked up a scalpel, and operated on human bodies for a living. Now, waking up every morning in a house that was falling apart around her, with no job, no income, and no obvious way out. The distance between those two realities is almost impossible to hold in your mind at once. At some point in 2020, she started going to church. The people who were there the first time Mitchell walked through the doors still remember it. She approached the pastor and told him directly that she needed a demon cast out of her. Then, during the service, it happened. She began to tremble. Then she started weeping. Then she screamed, a full hysterical breakdown, and collapsed to the floor. The congregation went completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody knew what to do. It was terrifying. It was bizarre, and nobody who witnessed it forgot it. It was at that very church that Jemma Mitchell met Mee Kuen Chong. Whatever Mitchell was feeling when she walked into that building, desperation, grief, something she couldn't name, she was also watching. And what she saw in Mee Kuen Chong was someone who owned a house outright, had money in the bank, had no children to leave it to, and had spent her entire life being told by her faith that it was her duty to help people who were struggling. Mitchell moved carefully. She drew on her medical background and began positioning herself as someone who could genuinely help with Mee Kuen Chong's mental health, someone with real expertise, real knowledge, someone who wanted to see her friend get better. And Mee Kuen Chong believed it. She told people around her that she felt her condition had actually improved, at least in part because of Mitchell's support. From the outside, the friendship looked real. It looked warm. It looked like exactly the kind of unlikely, beautiful bond that opens this story. But Mee Kuen Chong had no idea that Mitchell never saw her as a friend, not truly. Every act of care, every check-in, every hour spent together, it all had an agenda behind it. Once she had earned Mee Kuen Chong's trust completely, Mitchell began making her move. She started asking, repeatedly, persistently, for financial help with the house. Eventually, Mee Kuen Chong agreed to give her 200,000 British pounds, and then she changed her mind. Even through the fog of her illness, Mee Kuen Chong had moments of sharp, clear-headed judgment. And in one of those moments, she looked at the situation and offered Mitchell a different kind of advice. Stop pouring money into this house. The location alone means it could sell for up to £4 million. Sell it, take the money, enjoy your life. It was, by any reasonable measure, genuinely good counsel. Mitchell couldn't hear it. The idea of selling the house her grandmother had left her, she couldn't accept it. So she kept pushing, kept pressuring, until Mee Kuen Chong had finally had enough. On June 8th, 3 days before the murder, she sent Mitchell a text message that said it plainly. Unless you sell your house, I do not want you to come to my home. I am very stressed. And yet, when Mitchell promised, firmly, that she wouldn't bring up the house or money, Mee Kuen Chong relented. She agreed to meet on June 11th. She opened the door. That was the last decision she ever made. Police concluded that the meeting Mitchell proposed was not a spontaneous visit between friends. It was a carefully, meticulously planned trap. After killing Mee Kuen Chong, investigators believe Mitchell concealed the body somewhere on her property, in that chaotic, cluttered garden, and kept it there for 2 full weeks, waiting for the right moment to drive it out and dispose of it. With a mounting body of evidence in hand, including multiple segments of CCTV footage, police moved to make the arrest 10 days after the body was discovered. At 11:45 p.m. on July 6th, officers arrived at Mitchell's home. They knocked and knocked again. No response. It wasn't until they forced their way inside that Mitchell finally appeared. Her hair was matted, pulled into messy pigtails. She wore oversized, baggy clothing. She looked completely disheveled. Her first move was to play innocent. She claimed she'd been asleep, said she hadn't heard the knocking. When officers told her why they were there, something flickered across her face, a brief flash of surprise. But she didn't ask why, didn't try to explain herself, didn't push back. She just asked quietly, whispering, whether she needed to bring shoes. In the interrogation room, Mitchell shut down entirely. Head down, posture closed, completely uncooperative. Every single question was met with the same 3 words: "I have nothing to say." So investigators turned their attention to the house, and what they found inside told a story she refused to tell herself. Among the items recovered was a will, purportedly signed by Mee Kuen Chong. According to this document, 95% of Mee Kuen Chong's total estate, valued at approximately 700,000 British pounds, was to be left to Jemma Mitchell. The will carried the signatures of 2 witnesses. One of them was Mitchell's neighbor, a neighbor who had been dead for a long time. The identity of the second witness was never disclosed. Both individuals had been missing since 2013. The authenticity of the document was, to put it mildly, deeply questionable. Police theorized that the red suitcase Mitchell had been carrying when she left Mee Kuen Chong's house on the day of the murder had contained exactly what she needed to pull this off: the forged will documents, along with Mee Kuen Chong's bank cards, passport, driver's license, and other identifying documents she had stripped from the house. As for the blue suitcase, the one Mitchell had hauled through the streets looking visibly exhausted, it was eventually located on the roof of a neighboring property. It was empty, but tucked inside one of its pockets was a blood-stained tea towel. DNA testing confirmed the blood was Mee Kuen Chong's. The suitcase had been used to transport the body, and those shattered ribs, forensic examiners noted they were entirely consistent with a body being forcibly compressed into a confined space. A subsequent search turned up something else: Mee Kuen Chong's original will. Its contents revealed exactly what she had always intended: her entire estate, every last penny, donated to charity after her death. And then there was the wall calendar. On June 26th, the day Mitchell made that long drive to Devon, the entry read simply, 8 a.m., dispose of rubbish. Police also found, inside Mitchell's home, a length of orange rope. When compared to the rope found in Mee Kuen Chong's handbag at the scene, the material was an identical match. But there were things police still couldn't answer. Why did Mitchell dismember the body? And where exactly did that happen? Those questions remained open. As for motive, investigators settled on 2 main theories. The first, dismemberment was a deliberate attempt to slow down identification, to buy time. Mitchell had even dressed Mee Kuen Chong in ill-fitting, nondescript clothing, the kind of outfit that might make a body look like a homeless person, someone without ties, someone who might not be reported missing for a long time. The second theory was darker and more visceral, that the dismemberment was an explosion of rage, that Mitchell had allowed herself to hope, had seen that money within reach, and when it slipped away, something in her snapped completely. Mitchell's ex-boyfriend went to the media. He said he was shocked, genuinely, deeply shocked, and that he simply could not reconcile what he was hearing with the woman he had known. In his memory, she was an extrovert, the kind of person whose smile could light up an entire room. She loved dancing. She went to festivals. She had even done background work as an extra in a pop music video. He speculated that she might have developed a severe personality disorder somewhere along the way, something that changed her, because the person he knew, he insisted, was not capable of this. Mitchell herself denied everything, flatly and consistently. The case moved to trial in October 2022 at the Central Criminal Court in London. The proceedings were conducted via video link. When Mitchell appeared on screen for the first time, her mother, seated in the courtroom, immediately blew kisses in her direction. She had already declared publicly, before a single piece of evidence had been presented, that her daughter was innocent. She showed no sign of wavering from that position throughout. The CCTV footage was played repeatedly and proved to be the spine of the prosecution's case. Working frame by frame through that footage, prosecutors reconstructed the sequence of events with a kind of precision that left very little room for alternative explanations. The backpack Mitchell had been wearing when she arrived at Mee Kuen Chong's house, they argued, had contained the murder weapon. Once inside, she allegedly delivered a single targeted fatal blow, which would explain why there were no signs of a prolonged struggle anywhere in the house. During the attack, she injured her own finger, which is why she ended up at the hospital that same afternoon. Then came the detail that made the courtroom go quiet. Forensic experts pointed out that given Mitchell's background as an orthopedic surgeon and her own documented, openly stated interest in neuroanatomy and human dissection, she possessed exactly the professional knowledge required to do what was done to that body. She didn't just know how the human body was assembled, she knew precisely how to take it apart. The murder weapon, however, was never recovered, not at the scene, not in her home, nowhere. The prosecution then laid out, methodically and in full, everything Mitchell had done after the murder. The false reports sent to missing persons charities. The carefully worded messages on WhatsApp and other platforms feeding misleading information to anyone who asked about Mee Kuen Chong's whereabouts. The story about Malaysia, repeated to multiple people, consistent in its detail, entirely fabricated. Every move, prosecutors argued, was deliberate. Every move had been thought through in advance. Mitchell's explanation for all of it was simple. She sat in that courtroom and called it coincidence. The drive to Devon, the one that lined up precisely with the body's location. The one where her tire blew on the exact same road where Mee Kuen Chong was found. The one she made alone at 8 in the morning with a heavy suitcase in the trunk was, she said, a spontaneous road trip, a vacation, something she decided on a whim. She had simply felt like going for a drive, nothing more than that. The defense wasn't without its arguments. Mitchell's lawyer pointed out that she still had 93,000 British pounds sitting in her bank account, hardly the portrait of someone so financially desperate that murder became the only option. And more importantly, the case had a fundamental evidentiary gap that the defense returned to again and again. Forensics had been unable to establish a definitive cause of death. Mitchell's DNA had not been found on the body. There was no murder weapon. There was no eyewitness. There was not a single piece of direct physical evidence placing her hands on Mee Kuen Chong at the moment she died. Everything the prosecution had built its case on was circumstantial. Individually, each piece could be explained away. The defense wanted the jury to hold on to that. Mee Kuen Chong's sister took the stand. She didn't speak for long. She said she was absolutely heartbroken. Not just that her sister was gone, but that she had spent so much of her life in mental torment, fighting an illness that never fully let go of her. And that after all of that, her life had ended in a way that no one should ever have to end. It was a grief that went beyond words. The courtroom was very quiet when she finished. Then the character witnesses took the stand for Mitchell. One by one, they described a woman they genuinely believed they knew. To them, she had been a sincere, devoted Christian, at church every Sunday without fail, talking about joining the band, learning an instrument, getting more involved in the community. They spoke about her warmth, her reliability, the way she showed up for people. They meant every word of it. You could tell. And then the prosecution reminded the jury of something. On the afternoon of June 11th, the same day Mee Kuen Chong was killed, the same day Mitchell had dragged 2 heavy suitcases through the streets and ended up at a hospital with a fractured finger. Mitchell had been on her phone, sending messages to friends, cheerful messages, checking in, asking how people were doing, the kind of casual back and forth you have with someone when you've had a perfectly ordinary day. At one point she mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd had a really wonderful day. The jury sat with that. In his instructions, the judge was careful and precise. He reminded them that this was a circumstantial case. There was no direct eyewitness testimony, and that required a higher level of careful, deliberate consideration before reaching any verdict. He also outlined a critical distinction. If Mitchell had not intentionally set out to kill Mee Kuen Chong, but had caused her death without that specific intent, then even the subsequent decapitation and disposal of the body would need to be weighed within the framework of manslaughter, not murder. Intent was everything. The jury had to be certain, not just about what happened, but about what Mitchell had meant to make happen when she walked through that door. They deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, they were unanimous. In October 2022, the verdict was delivered, guilty. Jemma Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 34 years before she would be eligible for parole. The judge did not mince words. He described Mitchell as exceptionally cruel and exceptionally cunning. She had shown zero remorse after committing the murder. She had disposed of the body in a manner that was nothing short of brutal, and she had denied her guilt from the very first moment to the very last. A severe sentence, he said, was not just appropriate, it was unavoidable. When the verdict was read, Mitchell's face barely moved. She closed her eyes for just a moment. That was all. She made history that day, and not in any way she could have wanted. Jemma Mitchell became the first female criminal in British history to have her sentencing broadcast live on television. It was a landmark moment in the push for greater transparency in the British justice system, and the case itself, a conviction secured almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, left a deep and lasting mark on British legal history. Mitchell's mother refused to accept any of it. In the days and weeks after the conviction, she went back to the media. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, persistently, with the kind of energy that only a mother who genuinely believes her child has been wronged can sustain. She sat in front of cameras and called it a conspiracy. She said the police were corrupt. She said her daughter was the real victim. And she picked apart the investigation point by point with the focused intensity of someone who had been rehearsing the arguments for months. If Mitchell had truly committed this murder, her mother argued, Mee Kuen Chong's DNA would have been found somewhere in that house. It wasn't. And on June 26th, the very day police had identified as the body disposal run, Mitchell had actually invited her mother to come along before she drove off. Would someone on their way to dump a body really extend that invitation? She also had an explanation for the blue suitcase. She told police she had personally seen what was inside it: 3 5-kilogram water bottles, a folding chair, and a sun umbrella. And then she offered the version of events she believed to be true. Mee Kuen Chong, she said, had died from an accidental fall. Mitchell had then attempted to take her own life. The body was later found by an unknown passerby who desecrated it, and Mitchell, who just happened to be passing through that same remote stretch of Devon countryside, had been framed. By whom and to what end, she did not say. Nobody took her up on it. As of this publication, the main legal proceedings in this case have concluded, but there are questions that may never be fully answered. Why did Mitchell keep the body for 2 weeks before making that drive? What was the reasoning, practical, psychological, or otherwise, behind the method of disposal? These are the kinds of details that linger, that keep people turning this case over in their minds long after the verdict has been delivered, long after the cameras have moved on. What we know is this: Jemma Mitchell had options. She had an elite education, 7 years of surgical experience, the credentials and the capability to walk back into a legitimate, well-paying career and rebuild from there. That door was never fully closed to her. She chose not to walk through it. Instead, she chose Mee Kuen Chong, a lonely, unwell woman who had opened her home and her heart to someone she believed was her friend. And she chose to see in her nothing more than a problem to be solved and an estate to be collected. Mee Kuen Chong had spent her whole life giving things away: her food, her spare rooms, her money, her time. She had written a will leaving everything she owned to strangers who needed it more than anyone she knew. In the end, the only thing taken from her was the one thing she hadn't offered. Mitchell now sits in a prison cell, facing decades behind bars, in conditions about as far from the life she once imagined for herself as it's possible to get. Whether she has ever allowed herself to feel genuine remorse, that we simply don't know. She has never said, and given everything we know about how she operates, she may never say. But Mee Kuen Chong deserves to be remembered for more than the way she died. She was a woman who believed, in a very practical and daily way, that the point of having something was to share it. That is rarer than it sounds, and it is worth holding on to, especially in a story that shows, with brutal clarity, what happens when the person sitting across from you believes the exact opposite. That's all for today. We'll see you in the next one.